I've done a lot of different jobs, and I've had a lot of different sources of income and ways to create, I'm going to use air quotes here, wealth. The only way I've actually acquired anything remotely resembling wealth is through real estate.
Get ready for Real Lives of Real Estate, where the world of real estate meets the essence of your life. Buckle up as we unravel stories, homes, and the heartbeat behind it all. Let's dive into another episode. I hope you share and are encouraged. So I'm here with Kieran Brew, social media friend, first time meeting in person, located in the Hamptons. Overall, just a great guy. I can already tell. I love it. And a legend in the Hamptons, a veteran broker there. I saw in your profile you were doing about 60 million or so a year.
It's happened.
Yeah, it's happened. He said it's happened. But overall, I think the cooler part is you seem to have a very human approach to what's often a very inhumane industry where it's like so cutthroat.
It is. And, it's important, I think, as you know, and I think that's what's kind of brought us together is that we both sort of have this people first kind of understanding that it's buying and selling homes in particular, any kind of real estate, but homes in particular, it's a really personal thing.
Very.
And, in the Hamptons, it gets a little bit mercenary because most of what people look at, despite the fact that it's a home, it's almost always a second home, and it's usually an investment. So it's not like a normal housing market where people are going to buy a house with the intention of living there and bringing their kids up through the school system and through college and in the neighborhood. They're there. So it's a little bit more, not quite as warm and fuzzy, but it's important to keep the warm and fuzzy part there because it's still a home that people are going to come to and enjoy and have great memories, and maybe even better than their regular home because,
for sure.
When you're there on vacation, you're there during the summer, you're really having great times, and and that's what it's all about.
My wife actually, I never actually mentioned this, but my wife actually grew up in she spent middle school and she was born in Brazil, came to the States. Her father is a minister in the Presbytery, right? And he's a phenomenal man, phenomenal pastor, love him. And he actually was pastoring a Brazilian church in Hampton Bays.
Wow.
Yeah, so he was there. So
Didn't know we had one of those.
Yeah, there we go. Well, it's a smaller congregation, but you got one. They rented I think they ran like a middle school or something, or a small building. They basically church out of a van or something like that. But she was there from middle school and high school. And she has a bunch of friends there, Yugoslavians, that we visit there. Yeah, Yugoslavian community here at Hampton Bays. And they lived there. They actually did go through the school system. But they own a motel on the water. I forgot the name of the motel. But we actually go there now.
In Hampton Bays.
In Hampton Bays, yeah. Right on the water. They have the jet skis. It's a great time. Yeah. And I only ever went to Hampton Bays because of my wife. And now we go to Hamptons. We see there's one place that's really cool. The dogfish. What is it? Fish? Something fish. I don't know.
There's a bunch of cool fish. There's
all the fishes.
Long Island's got so many fishes on it. There was one guy who was basically opening up a restaurant every couple of years with some variation of the word fish.
Oh, okay, yeah. So he was right. He really populated it.
Say a word and fish, and he probably had the restaurant.
I think it was cowfish.
Cowfish.
That's a good one. That's what. Oh,
yes.
boom.
Yes.
Yeah. But I went there, so I've been there a few times. I honestly love it. Yeah. It's so peaceful. You feel like you're in a different state. Honestly,
it's from New Jersey. You are,
yeah.
It's almost a different country,
but definitely from Manhattan.
Definitely from the city for sure. Long Island is a different, it's a different place. Well, one thing I don't own up to a whole lot in the Hamptons is that I'm actually a Jersey boy.
Really?
Yes, sir.
No
yes, sir.
way.
I swear.
Oh, I knew we were kindred spirits. I knew it. I said there's something good about this guy.
Born in Englewood Hospital,
nice.
And raised in Montvale, New Jersey.
Okay, wow.
And so, it's funny when you said you go to the Hamptons because for some reason, my mother never settled into New Jersey. She was born in Manhattan and raised in the Bronx. Okay. And when she moved to New Jersey, it might as well have been to Kentucky. So she just never settled in. So when we went away, for summers, which they grew up doing, in the Bronx, they lived in the Bronx and they went to Rockaway for the summer. This was the Irish community that lived in the Bronx. But they never went to the Jersey Shore for whatever reason. All my friends would go to the Jersey Shore and we would always go to Long Island. At that time, it was before it was referred to as the Hamptons.
Yeah.
That came a little bit later. So, it was just something different. And, when I'd come back from being away all summer, people were like, where were you? And it's like, oh, I was at the beach. And they're like, you mean the shore?
And it was strange for them probably because in Jersey, no one goes to Hamptons. Everyone in Jersey goes
Especially, I'm talking about the 70s.
Oh, yeah. So that actually, wow, this is a great segue because the whole heart of the podcast, and I saw with yours, it's like yours, you mentioned on one, I listened to the podcast that you did, it was what's happening in the Hamptons or Hamptons happening or something like that. And you said like, oh, this was like the storytelling aspect was something that you really liked and about, right, I want to talk about this. But this podcast is essentially like my Hartford is the same way. For me, it's like a creative outlet. I want all things Newark, so I always try to keep Newark as much as possible. But my friend from Jersey, from the Hamptons now, what I love about it's like the real lives of real estate. Right? Because if you think about our industry, we usually only think about three things, right? Or like are known for three things. Either one, making a lot of money is what like the perception always is.
Sure.
Two, getting overpaid, right?
Yes.
Or three, like how like shark infested it is. Those are like the three, or beautiful luxury houses.
And untrustworthy. We're untrustworthy.
Yes.
Don't forget that. That's
key.
That's
key.
A little.
That's
that kind of layers over all three of the things. It's like don't trust whatever they say.
Yeah.
It's like,
and then
so it's okay to lie to us.
Yeah. But in all seriousness,
we're fair game.
But the part of the podcast is for like us to see what is like how is real estate, not the industry, yes, of course, but even outside the industry, like real estate has physical spaces. Like we walked up this beautiful mansion that we're in, right? The Career Scout mansion here in Newark, and it gives you kind of a wow, there's a history here, right? So how do you think? My question is really, what did you first grow up in Montvale? You said Montvale, right?
Yes.
Montvale. Did you guys grow up in a house?
I have a funny story about that because I left Montvale on almost never looked back until Facebook came out. And then I connected with a lot of people who I grew up with. And, there were pages. Montvale Memories was one of them. And so, I was on this page and all of a sudden I looked at a post and it said, we just bought this beautiful old house in Montvale and I'm wondering if anybody knows any of the history. And I look at it and my jaw dropped to the floor because it was the house I grew up in.
Oh, wow.
And so I sent him a whole bunch of photographs of all the way back to the early 60s, maybe even late 50s.
Wow.
Pictures of my grandparents there. My parents bought the house, I think, in 57 or 58, something like that. And we lived there until the 80s. And, it was really fun. It was neat. And a lot of the house. So it was an old farmhouse, actually. So it's kind of funny. Montvale, yeah. Montvale was all apple farms in those days. Yes. Montvale.
Yeah.
Yes, Montvale. Guys, we get a lot
cidery.
of Montvale. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
When you went apple picking or pumpkin picking or whatever you did in the fall back then, you went to Montvale. We had farms.
Yeah, definitely no longer. No more apple farms.
No. There's Wegmans, I think, took over the apple farms.
Yeah, no more apple farms.
It's now Mercedes-Benz office park and, all kinds of housing tracts.
Wait, so you were born, your parents are Irish, I'm hearing, right?
All my grandparents came from Ireland.
Okay, wow. So
all four of my grandparents.
Oh, wow. So your parents were first gen.
Yes.
Oh, so you're second gen.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Pretty cool. Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. And then you grew up in Montvale. You guys had this beautiful, this house. Well, did you grow up with brothers?
How did you know?
I can see it.
One older, one younger. I am a middle child, and that explains a lot.
We found everything.
Anybody that's been close to me at any time during
I'm
my
a
life
middle child as well.
Are you? Okay, there again. Somehow. Instagram is really good at putting people together.
The algorithm hits.
I was trying to think how we first connected.
I saw you on my Explore page. I saw you on my Explore page. I just loved your stuff. I thought you were so good.
That's funny.
And so you grew up. Did you have your own room growing up or no?
Not at first.
Okay,
at first, I was at the top of a bunk bed.
Cool.
And it was a neat old farmhouse that my parents loved because it was private. There was a lot of space around it. There were apple trees everywhere, yellow jackets everywhere. We had a barn that was no longer a barn. It was a rundown place where my father accumulated junk. We had a tool shed, which my father accumulated tool junk. And then we had a chicken coop in which they're just the junk somehow.
Oh, wow. The junk's junk.
It's a junky. Yeah. It was like junkiest.
How do you think, your parents grew up in the Bronx, how do you think the real estate of growing up here in Montvale versus if your parents would have stayed in the Bronx, how do you think you would have turned out differently?
Oh my God, it's impossible to say. I don't, they moved out during the middle, like you were telling me the history of Newark. The history of the Bronx was not all that different. You had white flight of the 50s,
There was a white flight in the Bronx?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, I never even knew that story.
Absolutely, yeah. My parents, they would say, we don't go back to that neighborhood because it was, it was a neighborhood that changed a lot, and it's changed back a lot now. I mean, it's become more of a working class, middle class sort of neighborhood, but it went from, when I could remember. Okay, so just going to back up just a second, please. Because we grew up on this farm. And I like to say I grew up on a farm. It wasn't a working farm. It had been a farm at one point in its previous life. And then my father owned a bar and restaurant in New York City.
From Montvale.
We lived in Montvale. He commuted to the city every day to run and
a bar,
own and operate a bar and restaurant in New York City.
Wow, what part of New York City? Manhattan?
34th Street.
34th. Wow.
34th between Lexington and 3rd. So I also like to say I grew up in a bar. Yeah. And neither of those are untrue.
Yeah.
So I have some influences of both. Probably the bar more than anything.
Now, what kind of bar are we talking? Are we talking like an Irish pub bar? Are we talking about like restaurant, more sit-down spot, closed at 12?
It was both. It was a big, raucous bar. And at that time, in the 60s and 70s, it was a popular New York City singles bar in some ways. And it was a restaurant, and it was a place where the neighborhood, again, that neighborhood changed a lot. Again, it changed a little bit differently because what happened was the 3rd Avenue L came down. And when that happened, the whole east side in Midtown changed over. And a lot of high-rise apartment buildings and high-rise office buildings came in where they had been just, tenements of, what we call tenements in New York City. Now they call mixed-use buildings, which is, I think, the more, normal way to say it. Firefighters call them taxpayers.
Oh, okay, there we go.
But yeah, that was the neighborhood, and then the neighborhood changed. And every time I go back there, it changes even more. There are places that I remember that used to be. Oh, that was where the diner was in the Cavalier Hotel, which was where single room occupancy people would live, and now it's just glass tower.
Wow, it's so crazy because you yourself had already. If you see like the places that you called home. Right? Like your real estate, like anchors in your life, Amway?
Three places.
Yeah.
The farm, the bar, and the Hamptons.
The anchors of your life have all undergone such drastic changes. And even one cool thing is the places that you referred to went through drastic changes before you as well. If you think about like Manhattan was what? Before it was Manhattan, right? It was like Native Americans, indigenous people, right? They were doing their thing there, right?
There's a lot of little, like New York City still is to some extent, a lot of little pockets of ethnic sort of cultures, that communities that stayed together for a good part of the 20th century. And then I guess it was really technology and transportation that kind of split those up. And I mean, when my parents were growing up, Irish people didn't marry Italian people. They went to the same schools, they went to the same churches. Yeah. They lived in the same neighborhoods, but then that sort of fell away during the 60s and 70s, and today it's barely thought of.
Barely thought of
in a lot of communities, and and it depends how far removed I think they are from the culture they came from. There are a lot of cultures that when they come here, they stick together, and marrying outside that culture is discouraged until it happens, and then all of a sudden.
It becomes norm. So recently, actually,
that's
enough,
my own personal.
No. I just saw this happen.
Not necessarily the opinion of this podcast.
But no, I just saw this take place. So with real estate, you always think about sales to sales. I always like to say, like any space you have, even a city is real estate. Right? If you think about their city planners, one of my favorite, most fascinating people to in Newark history is a guy named Dietz, Dietz. He was the founder. He was an architect and one of the founders of NJIT. Right? Very, very interesting. Why? Prudential Center has a giant parking lot right next to it. Giants, like several giant parking lots. And what he petitioned
Just open air
just
parking?
open air parking. There's no levels yet. I'm sure they'll put levels,
Probably, yeah.
but he petitioned the city. This is back in the late 90s, mid 90s. I believe late 90s. Around there, late 90s, early 2000s. He petitioned the city to, instead of having the parking lots just remain parking for the building, increase the parking deck and use all the parking lots to build a park. A giant park, and with that was he was way ahead of his time. Was a bike path, I believe, that went on the train tracks, Route 21, almost alongside of it, and then a walking path from this, and like later on, a walking path or bike path from Jersey City all the way to Newark. Insane. This guy, why is that interesting? Because you got to think about the community. How would the community be impacted that instead of just having concrete? Right? Just concrete. In the Hamptons, when I go there, I literally feel younger. I feel more, why? It's not just building. It's, okay, there's nature here. We have no sidewalk. It's kind of a cool vibe. I ride my bicycle. And this guy, he was so ahead of his time because what he was trying to do is use city planning. He was petitioning the city planner. He was an architect. But he was petitioning city planner to design the city of Newark in a way that is connecting it to other cities. Now they just announced they have the funding approved. They actually are doing a walk path all the way from Jersey City back through to Montclair.
Wow.
A walking path with greenery, etc. Bicycle path as well, of course, from Jersey City, like 20 odd miles to Montclair. It goes through Kearney, another town. It goes through Newark, and it's connecting all these towns, all these cities, municipalities to one another.
And it's just a walking path, bike path. So there's no.
It used to be an old train.
I was going to say,
freight.
it sounds like a lot of cities have used light rail for that effect.
Yeah, well, that's the thing though. Newark does not want this. Newark wants nature. The city, New Jersey, right now wants to try its best to preserve some semblance of like a suburb. Yeah. Right now, it's just like I showed you outside the skyscraper. Right, there's like all they're doing is built like same thing you experienced. Sure. Right? You're like, there's glass towers, where, if they want to put up a 12-story building in the Hamptons, everyone's gonna be like, listen, settle down, right? But that's what they try to do here. But no one, right now, finally, the people are like, hey, pump the brakes.
They want more of it or they want less? Or I guess it depends where. Like
I think it depends
the city center, it seems like they want to go taller.
Yes.
And then outside the city center, it sounds like they want more green space.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, exactly. That's basically, downtown, they say build it. Let it rock. Mm-hmm. But on the outskirts and like on the more residential areas, actually, you know what's funny about this? It's usually where the owners live. Where there are investment properties, Newark, like 2 out of 3 houses sell to an investor. It's one of the highest in the whole city. I mean, highest in the whole country of the ratio, the proportion. Not second homes, LLCs, right? Mm-hmm. Institutional buyers are in Newark. But the crazy thing is, where like in North Newark, there's a neighborhood called Forest Hill, larger homes. You would love these houses. Gorgeous, like 4,000, square feet, 5,000 square feet, 3,700 square feet, larger. That's where the rich
Victorian area.
Yes. Beautiful, like old, beautiful. I love that. And all that neighborhood, they play no games. They shut it down. They were going to do ADUs, like backyard apartments, right? Wow, and the neighborhood got together and said, you can do it anywhere you want. You just can't do it here. And they now in Newark, where they pass in the ordinances, they will not allow in the historic sections to have any ADUs. Yeah. Only in the non-historic sections.
Yeah, we're having a problem with that too, because for us, our biggest, and when I say our, I'm talking about in the Hamptons. Yeah. Housing is at a crisis level because you think about it, you think about Hamptons real estate, 90+% of Hamptons real estate is second homeowners to affluent buyers.
I didn't know that.
The rest of it is people who actually live and work there. And what's happening more and more is that the buyers are moving into areas that had previously been occupied by 12-month residents. So a lot of, and they're selling out. I mean, it's hard to tell them not to.
The money's good. Well, where are they going? Hey, let's say I have a house in the Hamptons. I've been there for 10 years. Where am I moving to?
It's more like 30 years, more like 50 years. You're going to North Carolina, you're going to Florida, you're going to Vermont, you're going to Pennsylvania, you're going to places where you can take your $2 or $3 million for your ordinary home that you raised your kids in and live.
Comfortably.
much more comfortably because the cost of living out there is extraordinarily high.
That's true. So even if you've kept your property, the cost associated with living in the Hamptons, the
It's just
restaurants,
the
eating out,
day-to-day
the
cost.
day to day.
Yeah, there are no restaurants for just to go out and get something inexpensive. Maybe pizza places and lousy Chinese. That's pretty much what we have. And mediocre pizza and lousy Chinese. We would die for a Thai restaurant. But every restaurant that opens up becomes a high-end space because they have to in order to justify the cost of opening there.
That's true.
So,
and the cost of real estate, the rent,
the cost of real estate, the cost of labor is outrageous because people can't afford to live there. So, these houses, we're in real estate. Someone walks into a real estate office and says, "Hi, I'm looking for a rental for year round." Everybody dives under their desk. Nobody wants to deal with this because for one thing, it's terribly frustrating. It's very hard to find. And honestly, there's no money in it.
Yeah.
And so, we all have to feed our kids and
there's no real incentive for us.
There's no incentive for us.
Yeah.
And, I'd love to help them out. They're probably people I know. Maybe our kids go to school together. And so, we try. So we'll say something like, look, you have to pursue all the avenues. I'll look for something, but we don't have that in our database.
No.
Our rentals are for vacation rentals.
Everyone.
And so, I don't have a lot of monthly rentals for year round.
The year-round rental is probably tough.
It's brutal.
Very
brutal. And the stability is very low. So that what happens is all of a sudden you've been renting a house for 5 or 10 years and the landlord decides he wants to sell it.
And what can you do? Nothing.
You can't do anything.
No, but at the same time, to buy out there is so disproportionately expensive, right? Comparatively to the renting.
And it's gotten much, much worse in the last 4 to 5 years.
Yeah.
With everything else, the run up out there was extreme. And the bottom end really saw the highest gains percentage wise. In the past, when
You see the fire trucks.
Yeah.
Our friends at Newark Fire. They get the calendar invites. Hey, we're having a podcast. Please come and save the day. So you go through. I hope you guys are okay.
One thing that I like to say is that I have gotten in trouble for this is that the Hamptons real estate is not a housing market. It's more like a luxury goods market. So,
That's true.
because nobody has to buy there, nobody has to sell there. If you're buying a house in the Hamptons, it's because you want a house in the Hamptons, not because you got transferred there through your company.
Work or something.
As if, So, that's what drives it, and it's all elective.
There's no need.
There's no compulsion. No, exactly. So that makes it interesting for us because it's really difficult as salespeople who are trying to get people motivated to either buy or sell to establish a sense of urgency. And that's one of the most important things, as you know.
Yeah.
When you have a sense of urgency, it's because there's a good opportunity.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we as salespeople get the bad rap of trying to create a sense of urgency where it doesn't exist. And we'll say, oh, you better buy this. You better make an offer. You better make a move because, and they hear, buy it, sell it because I need the money and my kid's going to college or whatever else. And meantime, if they don't, somebody else is going to get the opportunity.
And that's why I do agree with you 100%. That's why it's so critical when you are communicating. And I tell my agents all the time, when we're communicating to buyers and sellers, buying a property or selling your property is a high consideration, high ticket sale, right? No one ever woke up, I'm going to buy a house today in the Hamptons. I've never heard of anyone doing that, right? They probably have thought this through to some extent. Maybe
I have stories. It's funny.
Okay. Well, actually, the point is though, or better yet, I'm going to sell. I think selling is even more.
Selling's more of a contemplation.
Yes, you're contemplating, where am I going to move to? So our job is never to we're not capable of creating the motivation. All I tell our agents is, our job is to discover the problem that they're experiencing and then try to help them solve their problem.
Sure.
We cannot solve the problem for them because then they see the sales pressure.
Sure.
And that's something I realized growing up. My family, we were so dysfunctional. I love my family, wonderful, and we were very dysfunctional. And we would always be like, we grew up low income, and we would always be like in manipulation, finessing, like, okay, how do we sneak into Disneyland, right?
Sure.
Or like, okay, hide the candy. So we always think about shh. And what I learned about that, ultimately, though, is a man forced against his will is of his own opinion still. That expression?
Oh, interesting.
A man forced against his will is of his own opinion still. So if I try to coerce my brother to do something for me, even if he says yes, guess what? He's going to half-ass it the whole time. But when I say, Bruce, do you think we should do this? My brother's name is Bruce. Bruce, what would happen if we did this?
Yeah.
Then he's telling me why we should do it. And I go, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. We should do this.
Yeah. It's funny. I had on my podcast, I had Ryan Serhant. He was the one. He was the one real estate person that did get a lot lot
I would imagine so.
Yeah. So we were talking. We were talking about raising kids, and we were also talking about sales. And he was talking about how in sales you have to let the decision, not pretend the decision or make them feel like the decision, but you have to actually let the decision be the other person's choice. They have to come up with the idea and they have to want it. Otherwise, like you say, you're just forcing somebody against their will. And then it's funny because then we were talking about kids, and at the time my son was 13. This was like a year ago, and they said, "How do you get a?" He said, "How do you get a 13-year-old to do what you want him to do?" And I said, "You have to let him think it's his idea."
See, I think parenting is a great way to learn sales. It seems like, it's either parenting,
A lot of parallels.
yes, or childhood dysfunction, one or the other. There we go.
Or both. I mean,
We're all. Oh, speaking of childhood, so when you were in the bar, were you like? I knew you say like a group in the bar. At what age did you start being like? Did you make the commute with your dad at a certain point?
we would sometimes. He would bring us into work, on days off, holidays sometimes. When I got a little older, sometimes I don't remember. I have great memories of riding into work with him and getting there early. And
You guys would drive or take transit?
He always drove. He always drove because he was driving at off hours. He could go a little late, and he would definitely come home late. Yeah. So I started working there. It's funny, what would happen was my mother would pick us up from school, again, in a car, packed. And we would drive to the city and spend the afternoon, evening on Friday at the bar, the restaurant. And then we would get in the car and then drive to Amagansett is the town where I live, which is just almost at the very end.
You guys literally on the weekend would go Friday?
We would go weekends. We would go Fridays and come back Sundays. So we would spend Friday evening, Friday afternoon in the restaurant.
So you would spend...
And I would... For us, it was like Disneyland. And I would go in the kitchen, and that's when I learned to cook.
And do you cook now still?
I do. Not as much as I have, but,
Wait. Let me understand you quick. You're telling me you went from...
I'm old, so there's going to be a lot of blanks to fill in.
Yeah. I like it. I like it a lot. We got to start only podcasting old people. I think is our new thing. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But
it's funny because nowadays they say that the real luxury in the Hamptons is not having to leave on Sunday.
That's a great saying.
Yeah,
that's a great saying.
And it's even
you should get a billboard. You should get a billboard on the way out. Be like, don't you wish you didn't have to leave?
Billboards.
Oh, in Hamptons, no billboards. Yeah, in Jersey, we're billboard people. Yeah, actually, you're right. I don't think I've seen one Hampton billboard in that long.
You won't.
In Long Island, I don't think there's many. Right?
There are two actually in the Hamptons, and they are both owned by the Shinnecock Nation.
Shinnecock Nation.
Yeah, which is Native American, indigenous, whatever.
Whatever the term is. I don't know the term. I say both
constantly. That's why I say Shinnecock Nation.
Yeah,
well, that's their word. Why don't we use their word? It seems easy, right?
and it sounds cool.
It's like, why are we making up words for other people?
Yeah, this is fun. Wait, okay, so let me, wow, very interesting. So I'm sure the person who's gone the weekend for the Hamptons and spending 15, 20, 25,000 for their like renting the house, the whole nine, they're like, well, yeah, this is our new norm. And that's what happens. The new norm just gets bigger and bigger.
It does. And when it gets really interesting is when you have kids, because their new norm now is your present norm. So they don't understand, and it gets very frustrating. My parents were frustrated with me because they grew up with nothing. They grew up. They didn't say low income. They said we grew up poor. And this is my grandfather on one side was a city policeman. and my grandfather on the other side owned a bar. And it was the classic Irish,
super classic.
sort of stereotypes. It's like this is how stereotypes get to be stereotypes.
The Brew family.
Yeah, so exactly. And so, we grew up. My father, we weren't wealthy, but, my father was making a good living. And so we were
stable,
living at a level that was different than the one they grew up with, but it was the one I grew up with and the only one that I knew. And now, as my family is probably, I wouldn't say we're at a higher level, but, my kids today have more than we had as kids. I like the baseball sort of example. My father would spend hours. We had one baseball. It was our baseball, and it's like, get the baseball. And if it went into the bushes, you went in and you got it. Nowadays, I have a bucket of baseballs, and a ball goes into the bushes. Those kids, they don't even, just grab another one.
Yeah. Oof.
And, it stings every time. It's like the hoop earrings, it's like, it's just a different sort of sense. And you wish they could understand, but I didn't understand when I was growing up. And they don't understand now. And that's because that's their base level. That's their level of understanding. And as a parent, it's really hard to empathize with that.
Yeah.
It's like, why are you telling me that this kid, that I should accept that? This kid should understand. It's like, but they don't. And it's not their fault. And you can't blame them for that. And you can't beat it into them. I mean, metaphorically, certainly can't beat it into them physically, but you can't, you can say it over and over, but you just sound like Charlie Brown's teacher, yeah.
Wow. What a timely parental podcast moment, because my wife and I, we're doing our trust, right? Or like our will, right?
You have kids now?
We have one. We have a 1-year-old.
A 1-year-old.
Yes,
Oh,
1-year-old.
boy.
Yeah.
Oh, you're so far ahead of the game.
So we have a 1-year-old, and my wife and I, we are, how it just changes your life. And I never even wanted kids. When I was dating my wife, I told her adamantly, I do not want children.
We were sworn non-breeders.
Why would we want kids? It's the most absurd thing in the world.
It's the dumbest move.
And then you have a kid and you're like, oh, I was an idiot.
I can't believe I lived without.
Yeah, this is the best.
So
this is a phenomenal.
What would my life be like without them today?
I'm considering, we're going on vacation this month. I'm considering taking the baby. I cannot fathom. I used to ridicule when Deb and I would go on vacation, we would see people with their kids, like new infants. I'm like, oh, why is this person not relaxing? They're going to be. Now I'm like, I don't want to leave him at home. I want to bring him with me.
Sure.
We were talking about the will, and my wife wants. My wife's the complete opposite of me. Where like my family was fire, right? We grew up in like the chaos, and like we are all like lions and lionesses, and we are like warriors, and like a wild boar would be the if we had a crest, that would be on the thing, right? And whereas my wife, she grew up in obviously no family's perfect, but she grew up in an extremely stable household. We're like, what do we do with our son? And Deb's like, well, we should give him to my parents. It makes most sense. We're both Christians. They're Christian. It would be a clear alignment. 2 parent household is ideal. My mother single, my father, my mother separated. I was like, okay, we don't want to be And I said, but Deb, I can't do it. And she's like, why? I'm like, I don't know. There's no way in hell I can give him to your parents. I was very adamant. And I said, no way in hell. And she said, why is that, Brent? I said, because if he goes with your parents, he won't have that fight in me. Like the fight that I have. He won't be a De Silva. He'll be an Assis. He needs to have that fight. That rah. And then I said it like 16 times to her. Finally, one time she cuts me off because she would bring it up. I would shut down. She brings up, she goes, do you realize no matter where our son grows up, he's never going to have what you have in you?
Right.
And I said, no, he will. He goes, you have what you have in you because you grew up in a like wonderful and aggressive, chaotic, dysfunctional home. And you were like constantly worried about money. Our son's, he's, why would you want our son to have that?
It's interesting. Yes, exactly. That's interesting.
Like
too.
she asked me, she's like, why do you want him to feel that one ball is everything?
It's interesting because nowadays we spend so much time talking about what makes us, we spend so much time on Instagram is really, it's really part of it. But this line that tough times make tough men and, good times, tough men make good times and good times make soft men and soft men make tough times. And so, we think about how like our kids, what would happen,
It's like my biggest fear, honestly.
It's a concern. It's a thought. I have a son who's 21. And he grew up wanting for nothing, but still, I would say his mom and I were fairly modest growing up. We don't have a big house. We don't spend money in flashy ways. We tend to save and invest, and we take nice trips, that sort of thing, like your family. But he always wanted the life, what he sees on Instagram, what he sees in culture, what he and for some reason that's become his motivation. And he's now 21 years old. He did not go to college. He did actually briefly, and realized it wasn't for him.
Okay, fair.
And now he lives in New York City. He works 6 days a week at a job, and he has his own business
on top
the
of the
side.
job. Oh, wow.
Well, it's interesting because he had his business first, and his business supports him, but he went out and got a job nonetheless.
To make even more money.
Well, I think it's not the money anymore. For a long time he said it was the money, but now it's the work. He likes the work. He likes what he does. He likes being around. He's into fashion.
Oh, cool.
Specifically Japanese streetwear, which, yes, it's a thing. I know.
So, no, I'm sure. I know in a very, very strange world, in high school, I was friends with so many Asians, Koreans predominantly, but also Japanese. In high school, because in New Jersey, we have a large Korean Japanese population in Fort Lee and Palisades Park. Very, very predominant Asian community. So I would actually be close. And let me tell you something. There is no people I know more in my life. I thought Brazilians were the most appearance orientated. Yeah. No, these Japanese, even Korean as well, they love their fashion. They will spend money on their fashion. Yeah. Things that you think are garbage, you're like, this is a raggedy shirt. I'm like,
well, and that's the thing. He knows about it. And he knows this was produced in 2005, and it was a collaboration between, So Watanabe and, Supreme or whatever. I'm just throwing out names that I've heard him say. Yeah. But he knows this stuff, and he knows why a shoe that looks like two shoes, the one that look very similar, why one is worth $600 and one is worth $80. And, because of this little mark here that shows it was a collaboration, that it was a special edition, stuff like that. So, and he loves that. He loves that. Wow. And so I think that the other thing that's interesting about this generation is that they don't want to work. And when I say they don't want to work, they don't want to be workers. They don't want to sit
that's the thing.
in a cubicle and under the fluorescent lights and, just be told what to do and some drudgery all day and night. And more kids are doing that, and they're finding out that they have the freedom because they have the knowledge and they have the information that they don't have to do that. And for people that grew up mostly in the 20th century and the early part of the 21st century, it's like, well, you have to work. You have to go out and you have to get a job and you have to be somebody and you have to be something and represent something and all of that.
At all costs.
Above all else, right? Number one, you have to have a job. And I think that they're learning that they can contribute and that they can create a space for themselves professionally, financially, culturally, without having to get in line and follow that path. And I think the pandemic really intensified that because they realized that, well, the other thing is, now you have a 1-year-old. My sons I have two sons. One is 14 and one is 21. They have been told their entire lives that there's not going to be an earth for them when they grow up.
I will say this is a pretty dark message to bring up with.
Yes, and the real irony about it is that we're not doing anything about it. Like we're saying, oh, we're not going to have an Earth here in 35, 25, 10, whatever, depends who you listen to, years. But pass me that plastic container of whatever else, and let's get in the pickup and go to a Yankee game and where they've got bright lights on and the whole city is lit up, and they look around and say, well, wait, if the world is coming to an end, why are we doing all of this? So then all of a sudden you have the pandemic. My son was a senior in high school, where it's like, you may not even last that long.
It's not even.
It can be taken away from you. You may not even get to 2035 to 2050 to 2100. Whenever they say the world is ending, this might be taken away from you tomorrow. So I think they got sort of a sense that I think it gave them a sense that my life has more value than that. That I need a sense of presence, if you will, like a sense of knowing that I've got to do what I've got to do in the moment because you never know when it's going to go away. Again, that's my own theory. Ravi, you feel free to cut that.
No, I think definitely keep that because the pandemic did bring a large perspective shift. Even for my especially if you think about the transitional period in America where we have we're not really good at moments of transition, right? I'm reading this book. It's called The Intentional Father. Really good book.
Intentional Father?
The Intentional Father. I highly recommend reading it. Yeah. It's a phenomenal book, honestly. And it talks about rites of passage, right? It's like, okay, when did you become a man is one of the questions it asks. I was like, that's a good question. I don't really know. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, then it gave 10 common answers when they surveyed people. It's like, I got my license, when I lost my virginity, when I got married, when I moved out of my house. And it's all these things. I'm like, but this is kind of like you doing it, right? It's like the boy becomes man on his own. There's no rite of passage where I think we have so many clients. I don't know if there's a large Jewish population in the Hamptons.
There is.
Okay. In New Jersey, a lot of Jewish, and a lot of our investors are Jewish. And I went to a Hasidic wedding. And I was really asking a lot about culture. A lot of my friends now are coming Jewish, right? Mm-hmm. And it's very cool to learn in the Orthodox Jewish community, even a whole different subset.
Yes.
And talking to them about it, their idea of the bar mitzvah and understanding what it means. Because I never knew what it meant, bar mitzvah. I'm like, what's a bar mitzvah? I had no idea. Right. They explained this is when you become a man. Mm-hmm. This is your rite of passage from boy to man. Mm-hmm. I'm like, really? He says, yeah, and you're held to a different standard. The community comes alongside you. The men are blessing you in acknowledging this. So it is interesting because you think about the transition between 18, right, your senior year of high school to college, huge. Now think your senior year, that's in June, right? The graduation ceremony is June. May, April, March, 3 months before your graduation, global chaos. The world is ending. Death tracker is skyrocketing. Masks. You're locking. It's like,
you can't leave your house.
You can't leave your house.
Anybody could die at any given moment.
No. Okay, I'm curious. So from the bar, you kept coming back to Hamptons, but you go Hamptons, but you always come back to Montvale. What transition from Montvale? Did you live in the city at one point, I'm guessing, before?
Yes. I think what you just said, it kind of has it always came back to the restaurant, always came back to 34th Street. That became the nucleus. So that New York City really became the heart. When I graduated from high school, I wanted to move to New York City. I didn't right away, but I did a couple of years after that. I went to work for the restaurant. I left college early and I went to work at the restaurant, and that really became the central part of our family's life. It always had been, but it really kind of contracted to that. The nucleus really kind of withdrew. And an interesting thing, when we talk about it, I did a little bit of looking into, the sort of what you're interested in with this podcast is that how real estate shapes our lives. And there are a couple of things about it. Number one, I've always been in a family that was either a tenant or a landlord or both at the same time. So I grew up scrubbing bathrooms to get them ready for rental season.
Yeah.
I grew up having, cottages and rentals and apartments and knowing that tenants. My father was historically bad at picking tenants or vice versa. But the other thing about it is that both in my parents' generation and in my generation, I've done a lot of different jobs and I've had a lot of different sources of income and ways to create, I'm going to use air quotes here, wealth. Just anything. The only way I've actually acquired anything remotely resembling wealth is through real estate. And so when I look at it, and this was a viral clip that I had on Instagram where I said that if you have $100,000, you can buy $1 million worth of real estate, and so you get the appreciation on that $1 million as opposed to the $100,000. Well, I got taken to task by a lot of stockbrokers, people in the finance markets, but I'll still hold to that because I bought a house in Brooklyn in 1995. It was a 2-family house. house, beautiful house, and I lived in the top 2 floors. It was a beautiful historic building. It wasn't historically
At the time, too. Yeah.
but it's it was a 100-year-old building.
Oh, okay.
And and it was great. And I lived in the top 2 floors, and I had a tenant in the bottom floor, and he paid half the mortgage, and I was basically living in a very very nice, much nicer than any of my friends in Manhattan, apartment for like $900 a month or $1,100 a month, something like that. And I bought it for X and I sold it for 4X 8 years later. And so I wish I still owned it.
Yeah, I bet, right? But in hindsight, look, I would tell you, I would agree with you 100%. One of the best, like pragmatically, real estate shapes our lives in the day to day. Like my wife makes a joke. She goes, she'll never go to bed with the dishes in the sink. She's like, either you're washing dishes or I'm washing, someone washing dishes. Because she says when she wakes up, the physical space being cluttered causes her stress, right?
Yeah.
So and that's a day to day. But in a very like building wealth mentality, I don't know any other avenue.
Well, certainly
that has
none
this-
that are as secure and less speculative. I mean, I got a lot of these people where they're like, "No, you can buy on margin. You can buy stocks on margin." It's like, sure.
okay.
What I'm going to do? I'm going to invest
Yeah.
in Peloton.
Yeah, come on. What are we saying here? No.
It's like you're up, you're down. It's like,
No.
sure, Bitcoin, whatever else. Real estate is certainly it's limited supply. It's always going to be needed.
I have a financial advisor. We were putting away for tax purposes like 60, 70K a year, right? Boom, put away.
Right.
2 years in a row. I said to my account, I said, I hate this with my soul. It sickens me. Now they're going to say diversify. Great. It's not for me. So I said, I hate this with my soul. It makes me feel sick to my stomach. I do not want to do this ever again. I do not want my money there. I want my money in property, something I can touch and feel. That's me. And I'm relatively young. So for me, I think I'm very young, actually. I'm 29, right? Yeah. 29, turning 30 this April. Feel free to give me a gift. But what I'm saying is this. For us to go to get what we see in real estate, right? Just like, I'm not even saying a huge building. I'm talking about regular single family, 2 family, 3 family, 4 family investment property. Normal, not crazy.
Right.
Look what we have. One, like you said, I put down on my first property. This is a true story. This is in Jersey City. This is not
Jersey City.
This is not 1995. This is my first property. I lost $7,000. It was a flip gone wrong. I learned my lesson. Great. This one, I bought an FHA property. I bought FHA. I put 3.5% down. It was $400,000.
Multifamily or single family?
Two family. Well, this is how beautiful real estate is. And I'm not that brilliant of a person. It's just common sense, right? I bought it for 3.5% down. That means I put 14 grand. The seller covered my closing costs. Win. Already won. 14,000. For me to put up 14,000, I own $400,000. I don't know any margin call that can do that. Any margin, right? 14,000. When I bought it for 400, the property was at a discount. It was appraised for 550. So my 14,000, the day I bought it, turned into $164,000. 14,000 plus 150.
Right.
I had money at the time to renovate. I renovated, self-financed the renovations at 200 grand. So I put 200 grand in, 250. I put in 225, something like that. And ended up when I did so I had this money in. Now I'm like 250 all in. Okay, a lot more money. Okay, not ideal. At the time, the rates were 3%. Free. 2.25 actually, my rate was on the house. Free. I bought it right in the pandemic, beginning. 2.25, my rate was free. It was free. I'm up. I spent 250 grand. When I refinance, because that's another thing. I don't know if you can do this with stocks. I've never heard about it. I don't know if you can cash out refinance against stocks. I know you can loan against, but I cash out refinance. I pull out all my money and then some. I pulled out like 320,000. The property appraised at 1.1. Where else could a normal guy with normal level of intellect, not genius level here, right? I love myself. I think I'm great, but let's be blunt. Do this.
So to simplify the math, you took $14,000 and turned it into $1.1 million. Now, granted, you had to put more money. You put another couple hundred into it.
Correct.
But even still, we're here 4 years later, and we have had sort of a historic run here. So we'll take that into consideration. But the bottom line is that my line is I don't know what's going to happen in 6 months. I don't know what's going to happen in a year. But 5 years from now, I have a pretty good sense that your property is probably going to be worth a good bit more than it is today. And you can take any 5-year period.
I love this.
Of the last 50 years in I always say Hamptons because it's my market, and look at them and you will always see an increase from point A to point B.
And even if it's not 5 years, okay, give it 10. You had a very good reel very good reel. You said, since when has real estate become short term?
Right.
You said that, and I copied it. I said, this is great. Because for me, when I talk to people now with the investing, I had this guy, he was 26 years old. He reached out to me. He said, hey, I want to buy a piece of property. I want to make $2,500 a month in cash flow. I said, are you nuts? This in New Jersey, we don't do $2,500 a month positive cash flow unless you're putting up a huge down payment. He wants to go FHA $2,500. I said, my friend, the goal should be $1,000. He said, oh, well, I saw this or yours and that. I said, brother, this is not my first. Like, we're putting in 25% down payments. We're saving up. We're adding value. You want turnkey? No, you may make $2,500. That may take you 10 years to get to that number.
Sure.
Are you okay with that?
Sure.
But I think you're right. The expectation is now versus there.
Yeah.
And to go back to the Jersey City property before I forget, I also Airbnb that property. The Airbnb on the property.
You didn't live there.
I lived there. I lived the first floor. I lived on the second floor, and I rented out the first floor, and I rented out the ground level to a buddy. And by renting I Airbnb the first floor, on average, last year I got $5,000 or so. The rental would have been $2,200. Talking about the Hamptons, the difficulty with short term versus long term.
Sure, yeah.
And now we moved out. We live in Newark now, that building I pointed to before, and we're renting the second floor. The average is $4,000. So we're getting $9,000 a month in Airbnb income on the property, plus the downstairs like $1,000. So you have $10,000. The mortgage is $4,700, $5,000. We're netting $5,000 a month after utilities. Where else can you this doesn't exist. All that say is my financial advisor told me this because I argued with him, and he's a buddy from church, very good guy, very, very good. He said, look, I'm going to tell you something that I'm not allowed to tell you, but I'm just going to give you my 2 cents. He said, you're not allowed to, if you can't, there's a term for it, but if you're part of a fund, you can't advise the money away. Something like that. I don't know what the term is.
Yeah.
But he's like, you want to buy property. There are other brokerage accounts, and I'm trying to remember what he said exactly, but basically they didn't do it, the company he's with, but there's other brokerage accounts that if we transfer the money, you can actually use that money to buy property, the 401k or your 403b,
Yes, that's
401k.
correct.
I didn't know about this.
Yeah. You have an SEP, I'm assuming.
Yeah, something like that.
SEP, IRA, whatever it's called. Yeah, it's a self-employment plan.
Yeah.
And yes, that can own real estate. It can own income-producing real estate. And you can't live in it. Nobody in your family can live in it, but that's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It's actually maybe better.
So, yeah, and you can borrow against that, and you can,
I had no idea.
You can invest in real estate just as clearly, and that's what you're because so many of our people, don't know that, because when you have an IRA or a 401k, you go to a money advisor to do that, and they're never going to tell you to buy real estate, and they're always going to tell you
put more money in. This is the safest.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and when he called me, I told him, I said 2 things. One, you're an incredible person. He goes, Brendan, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not telling you this as a financial advisor. I'm only telling you this as a friend, because it's not a financial conversation. You just happen to be my friend who I just happen to have a conversation with. And I'm like, okay. But I was in disbelief.
Yeah.
No one had told me that.
There's another thing that's interesting that you should know about. I only learned about it recently, but there are 1031 funds. So, like, if you have, let's say you've got money and you're selling a property and you need to do a 1031 exchange. And the property you identify, let's say you're selling a property for $1 million, and the property you've identified is only worth $750,000. Well, you're not going to find a property for $250,000. So there are funds. They're called Delaware Standard Trusts, I believe, and you invest with them, and they invested in real estate. So it's a like-kind exchange. It's still a like-kind exchange, and your money rests with them, and they manage it, and they handle the real estate end of it, and it's generally successful. Of course, it has disclaimers for pages after page, but it's something interesting, and certainly again, it's like advising the money away. I'm certainly not going to tell somebody who's looking to do a 1031 exchange. I shouldn't say I'm not going to, but I don't make any money if they take all the money and put it into a 1031 into a DST. But if they have leftover money,
that's a value. So no one's actually going to do that with the DST. What you're saying, like with all their funds, highly unlikely.
Right.
But I'm going to be honest. One thing I've learned with real estate as it impacts our lives, I had a broker once. He's been in the industry 40 years. He was my first broker. Guy was a beast, like a workaholic beast. Very, very committed, deeply committed to learning about real estate. He's an old school Portuguese guy, made story, very, very cool guy. He said, there's one thing I know more than anything else, that if I were to commit every moment of my waking life for the next however many years I have, I would never know all there is to know about real estate. I was like, what? You already know you're 40 years. So why am I sitting with you? He goes, the more you learn about real estate, the more you will realize, no matter how much you think you know, there's a lot more to know. And as you learn these things, I think as realtors, you actually, another thing, I read your bio on the Surham page, and you said like, and you did a really good thing. You reference a book. Oh, I don't know if you reference it, but it's in line with the book I just read, To Sell is Human by Daniel Pink. He talks about like the buyers now have more information oftentimes than sellers do about their property, about what the comps are. Our clients know a lot. So when they come to us, they're not coming for the one ABC. They're coming for the, okay, well, here's what you're saying. And actually in this context, it's actually not true.
Right.
So what you're saying is true, yes. But not in this
they
expert
have the
level.
data, they have the information. What they don't have is the context,
and therefore the ability to interpret it.
Exactly. So they need, sooner or later. My line is, sooner or later you're going to need an expert opinion.
Yeah.
And you're going to need somebody to tell you why that little tidbit you heard at a cocktail party about, so and so sold for, the guy down the street sold for 10 million. I've got to be worth 15, and that sort of stuff, and why that's just may not be true. And
then you find out when you do sell it.
What you read or hear on Zillow may or may not be true. There's plenty of false information out there too. So that's another thing that has to be sorted through.
You're referencing even like the most like entry level realtor expertise.
Sure.
But what you just said about the DST, that is a huge value.
And I only learned that this year.
That's what I'm saying. So when someone tells me, listen, you're a realtor, I could do your job.
I'm a good bit older than 29.
You see what I'm saying? When someone tells me, listen, this is not that hard, no offense, blah, 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 blah. I said, pragmatically, what you're saying is not hard. Yeah. When it comes to the nuances, like even yesterday, there was a situation where we were closing with a temporary CO. The attorney was going to kill the deal, saying, we can't close temporary CO because you can't move into the property. My client has to move in. I said, very interesting. Within 2 minutes, we went on Irvington. We went on the township here. We took their portal, their code, and screenshot it, sent it over to the attorney saying, actually, we've done this 12 other times in the past year, right? A dozen times in the past year. You definitely can move in with a temporary CO. Here's where it says in the regulations or the code that you can do it. And it's like, okay, well, could you write up a contract? Yeah, anyone could do that. But could you know the code well enough in one of 30 different towns you're servicing that it says, hey, you actually can move in. You have 1 year to fix everything. Yeah. The attorney shut down the deal. Literally killed. And then he said, upon further reflection, you are correct. My client would take on. I said, no, you can't argue. I'm like, oh, no, you're totally right. I would be busy too. You just missed it. It's all good. My head, I'm like, you idiots.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Anyways,
of course.
But Kieran, I do want to wrap up. I want to tell you, I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
With me, short tag, you can just probably see over somewhere. It's going to say Kieran. Wait, what is your Instagram?
It's Kieran Brew RE.
Kieran Brew RE. You can't miss it.
And there are a lot of. Are you getting imposters?
Imposters? Oh, I did get imposter from you. I reported it. I reported it.
Thank you. I don't know why so many people want to be me. It's not that great a deal.
Yeah. No, Kieran Brew RE.
Kieran Brew RE.
Real estate. Can't miss it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, brother.
Thanks for having me.
Yes.